Welcome everybody to the third meeting of the Agent Privacy and Security Subgroup. It's led by Chris Field with the Open Matter Network. And with that, I'll hand it over to Chris.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks a lot, Lou. So 2 weeks ago, we mapped the compliance gap. And this week, Joel from Certizen is going to show us what sits immediately after that. Once you have a proof, how do you verify it without trusting the party who's produced it? This is the who checks the checker problem, and Joel's brought 4 concrete proposals for standards bodies. I'll let him walk us through the EU AI Act date corrections first, because some of those bite on this Sunday. Our agenda today, a quick bit of housekeeping just to kick things off. Today, as I mentioned, Joel from Certizen is going to be presenting Governing What You Cannot See. After that, we'll do a quick little fireside mapping some of the gaps to the HOL zero knowledge boundary control architecture. Then we're going to quickly discuss the co-authorship opportunity that Joel's presenting. He's got 4 different proposals, I think 2 of which are pretty much already underway and 2 of which are open for collaboration. And then we're going to discuss our handouts. We have some handouts for this compliance, a compliance matrix and some verifiable governance. We're going to open that up to feedback, and then we aim to publish that next week. So before we kick it off with Joel, as I mentioned, we'd like to do some introductions. So if you're new here, maybe just put your hand up or unmute and go ahead and introduce yourself. I'm going to call on some.
Yeah, I can jump
call on some people. Yeah, go ahead, Alan.
Yeah, I'm with Crypto Mondays, working on their operations and building Agent Monday, and I've also been running into all sorts of security issues, and so I'm very interested in seeing where this goes and what we have to build against in terms of laws and rules and regulations.
Okay, yeah, great to have you here. Love what you're doing with DAIAA and Crypto Monday.
Yep.
Who else is new here? Ada, I don't believe you've introduced yourself so far at one of these.
Yeah, I think that's right. So I'm Ada Anderson. I'm the CTO, co-founder at Open Matter, and we are building all kinds of frontier cryptography stuff and seeing how we can apply it to this agentic era that seems to be rushing forward ever faster. So.
Yeah, love what you're doing. Obviously, I'm your biggest champion. So I also see 2 other new names. Joshua, we heard from you briefly, but that's before we kick things off. So do you want to introduce yourself and how you fit in here?
Well, hi, great to meet everybody. Great to see Alan and Lou, of course, the staple. I know them from Crypto Mondays. I was the host of Crypto Mondays Global, and we've been all over the world and excited about that, decentralized systems and privacy systems. But I also have my own business that helps automation for small and medium-sized businesses in Europe. And we use AI agents and also install AI agents. So specifically, the interesting thing about the movement of the data and the housing of the data and the centralization is super interesting to me here. And I just thank you and thank your team and thank, of course, Lou and Alan for making sure these meetings occur. You're doing great work.
I just want to say a quick hi to Joshua. We've met a few times at.
Oh, hi! Hey, what's up, man? Long day. What's up?
Are you good? Not much. Hard Rock Cafe was a great night, and the Sugar House, on 3rd Avenue, and you brought your child one time, and I liked your music. But are you in Germany? Are you back in Germany or?
Yeah, I'm in Vienna actually
Oh,
here.
yeah.
Yeah, and my wife on another point, my wife is one of Europe's leading compliance attorneys in the area of new technologies. So she's with the baby, but she'll be very interested to hear also what you guys are doing, and we think it's really cutting edge with the decentralization. But nice to see you, Bruce. Maybe we can catch up another time, man.
Absolutely. I just want to say that Europe has a lot of laws starting in August, and for the local, issues, and you have your own things which are driving maybe some companies in the U.S. to adopt some changes in their policies. Anyway, so sorry to interrupt, Chris. Sorry.
Oh, and crypto also. They've just on another angle. They've just really put the hammer down on the MiCA license too. So
yep.
Yeah, lots of stuff in the regulatory area. But I'm sure we're going to hear some super interesting stuff tonight too, man. But nice to see you, Bruce.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Brussels effect in full force, moving those regulations from Europe, invading the US. I also see we had someone else in Bonnie Halper. I don't know if you wanted to introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'll introduce myself. I'm not sure that I do belong here. I know Lou from way back. I write a newsletter covering technology, and besides that, I source deals for a very large family office.
Okay, perfect. Great to have you here. Anybody else want to just mention what you do quickly? We got just one more minute. Feel free. If not,
yeah, I'll just jump real quick. Just say hi to everyone. I'm Eric Forst, co-founder and CEO of Bloxy. We have a legal tech platform that helps AI agents manage contracts and agreements, and we use blockchain to store hashes of agreements. And we have a partnership with Joel and Certasen, so you can apply his credential and verification system to actual contracts that your agents are making. So thanks for running the script group, Chris. It's great.
Yeah, perfect. Great to see you back here. Joel, I should also mention Zoe did just message me right before this, said she's not going to be able to make it this week. But she's looking forward to continuing on the conversation afterwards. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Joel Hillier, who very gracefully volunteered to present this week. Joel is building some pretty interesting compliance mechanisms over at Certasen. IETF, SCITT, supply chain integrity, transparency, and trust. His presentation today is governing what you cannot see, software attestation standards for agentic systems. So we're going to hear all about it. Joel, I'll hand over the screen share to you if you want to pull yours up, and I'll stop sharing.
Great. Okay, thank you. I make mine into presentation mode so that it works. And then find everything. I'm not in my usual place today. I'm at a conference in the DC area in Arlington, Virginia at George Mason University on digital forensics, and gave a little presentation yesterday, which is kind of fun. So I've only got one small laptop screen, so I'm trying to manage all the different views here. One sec. Is that one?
Thanks for joining in while you're traveling. That was
no worries.
Great of you. Joel was keen. He messaged me 2 hours ago and said, I'm here. And lo and behold, he was in the wrong time zone.
Indeed, that was the truth. So let me just couch this conversation, because I'm in a room full of people that know a lot more than I do. And so specifically, I guess what I want to share today is going to be colored a little bit by my own experience as a practitioner who is not traditionally involved in the sorts of things that I guess I'm going to talk about. I've come into these areas because of what I do, not because that's how I originally started out. So I'm not sure if that made sense what I'm saying, but nevertheless, that's what I want to leave you as a positioning thought. So I've got a bunch of slides, and hopefully it'll all make sense. I'm not sure if the little view that I've got here is actually interrupting the view that you can see.
No, we see it clearly.
Okay, because I can see you on top of that. So just making sure that's not how it looks to you. All right, cool. So governing what you can't see, I guess, is an interesting thing. And thanks, Chris and everybody, for letting me have this chance. But there were 3 questions, I think, that were asked about what happens at the moment in terms of specifically the EU AI Act and so forth. And so a couple of the things that I wanted to address today really reflect those kinds of things. So we have, I don't know, I think 25 or 26 slides or something like that. So I'm not going to dwell too heavily on each one. So this will be made available to you at the end so that you can have the opportunity to reflect and sort of do a bit of a deeper dive on your own. But specifically, there is a couple of dates that moved this week. So I've just rechecked all of them against the official journal. And so that's what we'll be talking about. So jumping in, how did I get here is probably a good way to start. I mentioned before that I didn't start off in the world that I inhabit now, but it came as a result of being involved in what I would call trust relationships. So I spend a lot of time in senior roles in government and in the private sector, doing things that revolve around the idea of trust, and that we have to trust information, or we have to trust people, or we have to trust credentials, and so forth. So I was a chief procurement officer for the largest rail operator in Australia, sort of managing projects that ran into the billions of dollars of range. I worked in banking and insurance and in government, and I've managed transformation programs across the procurement function specifically, and trying to create a center of excellence for how do we do things one right way so that everyone is aligned on process and methodology and operating model and technology ecosystems and so forth. I've worked with a lot of startups, helping them become investor ready, and I've had my own startups, and I've been a business consultant for the longest time and worked with all the biggest consulting firms in the world on different projects, including mergers and acquisitions internationally and so forth. So all of those things taught me how things actually don't work. And that was really insightful, because when I decided to build Certison, it came with a lot of domain expertise and a lot of interesting experiences where what I thought was going to happen didn't happen, and wasted even tens and hundreds of millions of dollars in some instances on projects that were run by various companies and governments that were supposed to deliver results that never did, because the principles of trust were broken. What happened didn't actually happen the way that it was supposed to. So that's a little bit of how we got here. So let me work through some of these things. So every framework that we talk about really requires a record, but one of them specifically requires it to be protected. And so the EU AI Act, the NIST, the AI for the NIST in the United States, ISOs, which are globally relevant, specifically 27001. That's the one that we sort of think about the most in relation to technology. But what I think is most useful is to understand that in regards to what regulations require, there are 4 instruments. One of them's a shared instruction, and they produce a record, but the 27001 is the one that genuinely requires integrity. And so if you don't have data integrity, or if you don't have system or platform integrity, then whatever you're producing is not going to be as reliable. And so the rederivable nature by a relying party without your cooperation is what makes something valuable. So that we call that deterministic in practical terms. So can I independently replay the output without actually having to rely on the person who created it specifically? That's what Certison intends to be, and why we're operating at the protocol or the standards layer and having conversations this week with NIST, with IETF people, meeting with CISA on Friday, and with the people from MITRE, So taken in the aggregate, all of those different entities that I'm meeting with this week actually manage to cover all of the sorts of things that we're talking about in this conversation today, from either the standard or the implementation of a standards perspective. So what became law just this week is actually what I wanted just to sort of briefly touch on. So the regulation for the EU 2026/1744, that was the 24th of July, was when that was essentially put in force for the 27th, which was Monday, so a couple of days ago now. And the Article 52 was not deferred, so it applies the 2nd of August, which is this Sunday, and that's the one that I guess some people had wrong specifically, but the idea is nothing was repealed. The dates are now fixed, and being standards ready is super important. And how Citizen deals with that is actually in code. So what I've done with this platform, that is what Citizen represents as a verification infrastructure company, is taken all of these legislative pieces and standards and certification type things and reduced them to practice in code, so that the Citizen platform, which essentially is aimed at helping people establish trust, holds itself to the highest possible standard of trust itself. And so globally, there are 33 different regulatory type regimes that Citizen has a reconciliation to in the way that it operates. So when we provide outcomes or information to people that they can rely on, it's done in such a way that the regulations that we say they need to be compliant with, we are compliant with as well. And so we haven't been audited against all of them, but the code that is underlying the platform audits itself continuously against every known element of those compliance regimes. So Citizen is itself ISO 27001 and 9001 certified, which was achieved after only 110 days of operation. And that's because of the way that the system operates. So that's just a little bit of interesting things about what came into being as far as the law. And let's make my clicker work. Well, there we go. So I guess what attestations can't carry. So it's not a missing feature necessarily, it's a missing party, and there's 4 limits that are properties of the primitive that aren't defects in what anyone is building specifically. But what happens with attestation is it's a kind of thing that you can't attest yourself. It's like marking your own homework. So Citizen in that sense is not part of the attestation process, specifically in many instances. So Eric mentioned that we've formed some alliances there to go and do some interesting things. So the process that we will run in our agentic trust stack, or agentic AI trust stack, is not actually having Citizen as a participant in the transaction. It's monitoring that the transaction did what it said it would do. So it sits above that in the sense. So that's kind of a differentiating factor. So specifically with RFC 9334, that it names 7 roles, and the combination of roles and entities can be somewhat arbitrary. So these are the roles. There's an attester, a verifier, a relying party, the endorser, and I have to move you over so I can see the rest of my slide, the reference value provider, the verifier owner, and the relying party owner. So the whole point of this, the gap is not cryptographic, but every party has good cryptography in all those different roles, but the gap is that independence is currently a claim about organization charts that's made in prose, I guess, in a sense, and in a market that started selling it as a technical property. So what we try to do as regards to Citizen is to become the thing that people can rely upon independently to confirm. And I just had this conversation with one of the professors here at George Mason University, because they were talking about cryptography, not cryptography, forensic analysis of things, and said, can your platform do forensic analysis? I said, well, it does forensic analysis because it needs to, not because that's what it intended to in the first instance. And she said, well, what can it achieve? And I said, well, forensic analysis in the terms of what Citizen's doing is really specific to the methodology. So we will confirm that the methodology of forensic analysis was undertaken appropriately, because that's a claim that is being made, that the output is produced by the methodology. So we will verify the methodology and that the output is actually the product of that methodology, as opposed to the process itself. And is it a good process? So that's kind of nuanced, and hopefully that's making sense what I'm saying there. But as far as all of these roles, the point of what I think is necessary is that they can each be independently verified, and collectively, I guess that then makes it a stronger output. So if anyone's got questions as we go along, feel free to ask, but I just, again, say I'm not a deep expert in all of these things, or I understand the principles of them. And that's really what Citizen has been built on, is the principles of how do we confirm truth. And so most of what I do is actually not looking for the things that are fake or wrong, but it's actually determining how can we verify the truth of a claim in the most specific way possible that makes it illogical for it to be false. And that's where the determinism comes through in what we do. So it's a complicated process, but it's a lot of mathematical compute that's enabled by some AI technologies. So the four things that you need in a valid attestation, that I think you have to have an understanding of what is the intent, and then what is the provenance, and then the semantics, and then the independence. I keep making that point, but the intent is like a pre-deployment thing. And so how do we understand what is intended to happen? Well, there's usually some sort of suggestion as to the process and the expected outcome. And so you can derive intent from different pieces of evidence. It is a little bit semantic in that sense, but the idea is that intent has to be established, and then the limitations that are imposed upon whatever process is happening, they need to be verifiable as well, and that they are correct for the context. So in relation to the things that I think are missing for this, it's that there's, we've already solved things like authorization chaining, we've solved things like vertical chaining, and we have intra-domain sorts of things, so we can bind, which is a process of the whole chain of processes with one signature, and that we can make sure that there's a derivation chain that is visible to people so we can see how calculations work and so forth. But the thing that's open is this idea of a compound attestation, which is not an authorization. And if I just read my little piece here, it's across mutually distrusting parties running non-deterministic agents. So every control flow attestation scheme needs a golden control flow graph to compare against. And an LLM agent doesn't have one. And so I think that's not a theoretical thing. So I've got some ideas as to what we can do around that. But the idea of a compound attestation across mutually distrusting parties running non-deterministic agents, so each one skips the attesting part and nothing binds then the chain to the end. So that's where I think the opportunities lie, is to create something that's more holistic, that recognizes the component parts that need to be joined together in order to make something fully as an output, something that is fully reconcilable all the way through. And many platforms and applications will take care of specifically their own piece, where there's needs to be something that sits across the top, if you will, that connects them all together. So this is a little bit of an example of what that could look like. So 2:07 on a Tuesday, everything succeeds and every attestation passes. But this is I guess, in the way that I phrase it, a deliberately unremarkable scenario, and nothing fails and nobody misbehaves, but that's what makes it the hard case. So there's a compliance officer approves an agent to summarize something, and so they click approve, and then the agent delegates retrieval to agent B, and so there's a handoff that occurs there, which makes this agent B has broader index credentials because it also serves the legal team, so that delegation carries the task but not the scope. And so then agent B retrieves 340 passages, and so 9 come from an HR folder that shares a vendor tag, and every retrieval is authorized, but B genuinely holds those rights. And then agent B calls a third-party model endpoint, and the prompt carries the retrieved passages. The endpoint then runs in an attested environment and returns a clean attestation, and then the summary is returned, which is accurate and useful, and everything was done individually. But I guess 6 weeks later, if we go back and re-prosecute that, we can say, well, a data subject access request arrives. Did personal data leave the boundary? Under whose authority and under which version of the retention policy? And so in those 12 seconds, everything happened, but in a number of weeks later, those questions, you can't reassemble precisely and find out what happened and whether something was wrong. So I think the example shares reasonably well the idea that any kind of process or incident like this, where a compliance officer approves an agent to summarize vendor risk on a scope, they then delegate that to some agents who delegate to other agents and things like that. But you can't see the whole picture, and if anything occurred that shouldn't have occurred because no one was looking for that. Everyone was looking inwardly instead of outwardly, specifically to figure out, did we comply with things that are at a macro level as opposed to a micro level? And that's, I think, a big gap. So what I have done is to create some standards drafts, the internet drafts that I put on back in May and revised just in the last week on agentic AI governance. And I know Eric's done some work around this specifically as well with MIT. And so it'd be interesting to have Eric's take on some of that. But there's also another draft in relation to Essential 8, which is the compliance model that is presently unregulated in Australia. It's self-attesting, and so that's the same pattern as what we put on in terms of AI governance, but it's just applied to cyber hygiene for kind of a baseline view of things. And then also just recently have filed part 2 of the skip in what we call an ARP, an attestation reconciliation protocol. And so there's a couple of collaborations that are falling out of that opportunity for me as well, with some other people that I'm meeting this week and next. But I guess the standard, it doesn't replace the 42001 and the NIST AI Risk Management Framework or the EU AI Act, and it sort of specifically states that, but it sits beneath them and produces the artifact that each was designed to imply but doesn't deliver. And so I think there's genuine opportunity for this kind of group to work on standards in such a way that we can provide the color necessary for industry and government to be able to understand the implications of some of these things, because making a proclamation called the EU AI Act, it's made sometimes in a hurry as a response to things. And so it's trying to get ahead of the speed and the pace at which AI is running. And Sam Altman just this week announced that he thinks that we've reached the point of singularity where AI is now smarter than humans. And so that's a big claim to make, and will have significant ramifications if that is in fact proven to be true. And we've seen OpenAI have to make a couple of announcements in the recent weeks about how agents have escaped their bounds and gone on and done things that were unmonitored and unintended. And so contributing to the conversation in forums like this, and to the IETF, and to any of the other kinds of places where you can do that, I think is a really important thing for people that know stuff. And this is a room of people who know stuff. So my little sideways moment here is just to say, I think it's worth getting on the record. If you have an opinion and you have an opportunity to share that in a way that's meaningful, then I would say do it, because it's needed, and there are too few people trying to hold in check the things that are happening globally. And I listened to a little short episode on a podcast just this week where one fellow suggested that there are only 8 companies who will essentially hold the economic power in the world, and that those companies are managing AI technologies specifically. And if it's a commercially driven thing as opposed to a human driven or an ethics based thing, then it ends up bad. So I think, the conversation that we're having today and the continuing version of these is valuable. So I ran some, I guess, in terms of what I've been doing, the conformance run. So on Monday, I ran my IETF data and my ARP protocol against some other people's published corpora and posted it to the skid list with some pinned commits and the harnesses, the test harnesses that I used attached to that. And I guess the number that matters was that it was a cross-chain splice where both receipts hash and they verify correctly in isolation, but the forgery is a property of the set. And so what that really means is that the constraints itself that I was using sometime became indeterminate because I had no vector for it. And so I had to modify how I was testing and a little bit of my attestation reconciliation protocol. And so I shared that back with the group, and that received really positive feedback actually, because they said, oh, that's unusual for someone to admit that their thing didn't have all of the things that it was requiring. And so I think that's another principle that Citizen holds to, is that the truth has to be visible all the way through, not just at the end. And so sometimes we can make assertions that we realize are wrong and then hurriedly go back in the background and fix things, and then come back and say, no, yeah, it's always been true, but that isn't the case. So what I'm trying to do is be transparent, I suppose, in the way that I'm developing what I'm doing and sharing that with the global community in the Internet Engineering Forum and the other places where I get to operate. And so I guess in simple terms, I don't know everything, and the committee of the whole is what I rely upon to help improve what I've built and am building and what other people are doing, and to help them to make sure that when we apply the things that come out of standards or legal expectations, that we're doing it in such a way that's enabling as opposed to inhibiting, and it's not intended to create monopolistic sort of silos, but to create things that are genuinely collaborative. So when I did my PhD in a couple of years ago, it was specifically around using AI and collaboration as an enabler of optimization. And so that's why I like contributing and participating in places like this, where I can get to listen to other people and get feedback and to contribute ideas. And so that's an important part of how I operate personally, but as well as what my business is trying to create. So let's see. The 8 control areas through which AI governance is reconciled. So these are the things that I use. So they're not new controls, but inventory and shadow AI discovery, model and data provenance, prompt and output governance, logging to military and auditability, use case classification and risk assessment, sanctioned application control, identity and access control for AI, and incident drift and escalation response. I didn't read them in order, but you get the idea. But those are the 8 things. So number 6 is where my Tuesday example broke, and number 7 is the one that matters. It does not exist as a log, but can it be independently be re-derived? And the important part is that it must be independently re-derived, so that it's not what we call black box technology. And in this digital forensics conference that I'm at this week, that's one of the key things that people are suggesting, is that we can't have black box technology. And that's one of the common complaints against the leading technology firms in the digital forensics space, is that they do stuff without really sharing how they get there. And so the people who are experts in how you're supposed to get there can't see that it was actually done properly, and therefore have less trust in the output because they don't know and can't independently replay or rederive the outcome. And so as a building principle, that's again what Citizen does. It makes it deterministic, so that any decision that we produce, we can independently show how that was done with a cryptographic derivation chain. So I know I'm downloading a lot here, and everyone's being very polite and quiet, and I'm sure there are questions, but I do have a few more things that I want to share. So beyond the 8 specific things that I just mentioned, there's this idea of containment. So governance that's documented but never adversarially exercised, it misses the failure class that matters the most. So to quote what I've put in my draft, an autonomous system reaching an assigned objective through a consequence its operators neither authorized nor observed in time, including in a controlled capability evaluation, an agent escaping its intended execution boundary and acting on external infrastructure without human authorization, detected only after the fact. That's what I'm talking about, and that's what I think is interesting about the OpenAI cases this last 2 weeks or so. They've figured out that containment has to be exercised and not asserted. And so the failure of that is itself the event. And so that's where human oversight actually lives, is that we look and see, have we established proper containment? And if not, then that's where we're failing, I guess, the system and the people that will be affected by whatever comes after that. So it's a big topic, and agentic AI governance is definitely on everyone's agenda. And if it's not, then it should be. Those people that are deep into it will know how, I guess, that works and how sometimes that can be a difficult task. But it is doable, and it just requires the right kind of understanding of what the risks are. And so that risk analysis up the front in terms of how you deploy agentic AI into transactions or trust relationships generally is important. So there are some things that are low risk, and so you don't really have to worry about that. But where you're sharing protected information, or where you're doing something that has real world consequences, that's a big deal. And I've got a piece that's being published in the American Journal of Public Health on the 6th of August, which was a collaboration for 4 PhDs, some Johns Hopkins and UPenn, and me. I wasn't affiliated with any academic institution, but it was all about agentic AI governance in the context of research and research information that people collect from research participants. So I've been around this conversation for a while and had some interesting opportunities as a result of that. But I think where we're heading now is to the point where people have realized that there needs to be an increased level of maturity around how we understand AI in practice, and then how we govern it, and what sort of things failure modes look like. Because if we don't understand what failure modes look like, then the governance models will be wrong, because they won't anticipate or countenance the things that actually really matter. So there are 3 different kinds of maturity levels, I think. And so the attestation grade, if you will, goes from documented, operational, and adversarial ready. And so the control exists in the documented state, and it's described, but the baseline expectation is there, and where most implementations honestly start today, I guess, is there. Operationally, the control is enforced, but if we're adversarial ready, what that means is that the control has been exercised against a party that's trying to defeat it. So full red team kind of attacks. And so, again, as I've built Certicen, one of the key things that I've done routinely is, as we deliver a piece of code and ship it to production, before it gets there, it has to be red teamed, and not just once, often, and depending on the type of code being shipped, we'll do it multiple times until we get it right. And so I use some particular methods for red teaming to make things adversarial ready, which are not industry standard. And so it helps me leverage it. I guess what I've done is leveraged my background in a non-traditional computer science background, and to say I come from a business background, and so the failure modes that I've seen are all after the fact. And so I haven't really been in the code developing world very long, and so I didn't learn all the things that coders and sort of normal development people would work on. And so the way that I think about red teaming is very different from what is the normal approach. And I think that has given me an advantage, because I've discovered things about how to build technology faster as a result of that. And so if we talk about AI governance and being adversarial ready, I think there's some really novel ways to get there that are non-traditional, and be happy to talk offline if anyone wants to sort of explore that a little bit more. So yeah. The question of what to build and what to file, I think there are 6 properties that are worth building in now, and sort of 8 questions that we could run. And so these are what I'm going to propose as the end of my little presentation here. So the things that I think are worth exploring more is canonical serialization. So the absolute truth, in as much as we can establish it. So decide now and then write it down how a record is serialized. So the answers are standardized in different ways. So like these specific things here relate to different parts of standards and so forth, but also adding to that policy versions and binding them. So when Certicen operates, the thing that makes it deterministic is that if we present the same evidence or the same artifacts, and then we run it through the same policy engine, then we can make it byte for byte identical because nothing is variable. And so binding policy versions to processes and having canonical standards that we sort of serialize in different ways makes things much more reliable. And so the principle and the scope, not just the authority, need to be considered. So who's giving the authority and making sure that that authority naturally incorporates the bounds, the scope. Those things are important, that we have that independent replayability by any party, not just by someone who has access to the tool. So how can we make them external to whatever tool created it? And then evidence instead of assurance. So a lot of organizations will assure things. So a case study that I used in my presentation yesterday here at the Digital Forensics conference was about Wirecard and EY. So EY was the auditor for Wirecard for a very long time, and indeed for a decade. They approved audit reports that they theoretically conducted, only to discover at some point, unfortunately, that $1.9 billion of cash never existed. And they got fined in Germany. They got poorly, their reputation took a significant hit. There was a lot of things that were resulting from that. But that was assurance, is what EY was providing. They were supposed to be providing evidence, which is what an audit is intended to do, is that we confirm something, and that the audit logs and audit reports and audit records should have followed a methodology which required evidence to be presented and passed or failed against that sort of methodology and the standards of what evidence is. But EY did not do that, and for a decade they were found to be negligent in that responsibility. So despite the fact that they signed their name and they provided the assurance to the world that Wirecard was in fact solvent in the way that it was saying, it was found to be not the case. And so evidence instead of assurance is a critical thing. And then the idea, as I mentioned before, the adversarial exercise from day one, where we test containment by attacking it. And how would a threat actor approach this problem? Because they will have no scruples. And so when I arm my agentic red teams, I give them specific instructions to assume that I'm chained to a fence and I have no mechanism of defense, and that they are at liberty to destroy whatever I point them at. And so it provides some interesting results, and my conversations with my AI tools that do the red teaming for me make some really fascinating comments as they go through. And so I think we sometimes get confined or constrained, perhaps is a better word, in the approaches that we take for adversarial exercises, thinking that the enemy will have the same rules, but the enemy has zero rules. And so we need to operate in the same way. And for a lot of organizations to think that way is not natural. And so the idea of creating something that allows us to red team effectively is really important. So anyway, I think I'm going to leave you with these 8 questions to sort of run against your own systems, when you go home, or before you go home, just to think about this in the context of whatever it is that you do. So can you list every model endpoint your agents can reach? For your riskiest agent action, can you name the regulatory class that it falls into and show its reasoning? For a model in production, can you reconstruct which build produced the weights and who computed the reference value? And can an agent invoke a tool that's not on an approved list? And would you learn from that, from the system or from a person? For one output last Tuesday, so the one that I did, can I retrieve the exact prompt, the retrieved context, and the policy version that was in force? Number 6, when an agent A delegates to agent B, what carries the scope of the principal's authorization and not just the token? And then could someone outside of your organization detect if last month's logs had been altered without your cooperation? So is that replayable independently? Is that reframe? And has anyone deliberately tried to make an agent leave its execution boundary, and is the attempt recorded? So this is the OpenAI conversation in real time here, is what I'm reflecting to you. So let me just leave it there, because I know I've gone on for a long time and we're close to the end of the hour. So Chris, back to you.
Oh, thanks, Joel. That was very detailed. Really like how you mapped us through all that and gave some personal experiences and talked about your transparency in the building process. Talking about being chained to events, very graphic.
Indeed.
I
I'm
hope
a
the red
visual
teams
learner.
were
Chris. So-
Yeah, I am as well. I hope that those red teams were nice to you. I think it would be good to open up the floor for questions for anybody who wanted to touch on anything Joel mentioned in his presentation there. So let's just give it a sec. Feel free to just unmute, shout out, or raise your hand, whatever you're comfortable with. Go ahead, Lisa.
Hey, Joel, great presentation. You're right on. I just want to agree with some of the points you made, literally around just educating the public, because most people have no idea the ramifications of what's actually happening under the hood, right? They're like, I'm fine. Nothing's ever happened to me. I'm safe. My actions, my credit score is good. I've lived through every possible worst case scenario you can imagine, because I was living in Europe. A long story everybody knows. My social, a German driver's license, and an American Express card were stolen, sold on the dark web. And it's really bad. When AI comes, I will be gone in handcuffs for sure, because information is going to pop up about me, and it is popping up about me all over the world. And how do you stop the train once it's running? And I think with the attestation piece, which is going to be mission critical, who initiated that transaction? Who made a record of that transaction when it was actually the first time executed, whether it be a payment? So I don't know if that PDF came out that I tried to put on in the messaging.
No, the $500 payment that never arrived.
That's a really cool article. But I mean, just once something happens on chain, you can't reverse it. So what is there to protect us when that chain keeps going to the next task that it has? So that's my question. How do you stop the chain from running out of control?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I don't know if I have an effective answer for you, but I think certainly why I'm at this conference for digital forensics is because of things like that. How can we truly prove provenance? How can we truly prove authenticity? How can we truly prove authority? And how can we truly prove action was intended? And so there's a bunch of things around that I'm working on that sort of are part of what the Citizen platform incorporates to try and resolve some of those things. So we can't necessarily prevent, but we can certainly promote, and we can, I guess, reverse engineer sometimes to a certain extent how we got to a certain position. And I think that's as good as we're going to get, unfortunately. There'll never be a way to effectively prevent, but we do have to be able to remediate.
Right. So I am working with companies that are creating those receipts and attaching, I think I spoke last time, the DID to the IMEI number of the device, or if it's a computer to an IMEI number. That where did that all start? Like, who owned that device that initiated the first chain reaction?
Yeah. No, I think that's great. And to be able to work on that sort of thing, fortunately, digital fingerprints are real. And despite the fact that we can edit some of them, we can't edit all of them. And so my approach to building verification includes what is the cost of the truth flaw. And so there are some things which will always be immutable. And so we can determine those things. And so in order to make a fake that passes the truth flaw, what is the cost of doing that in time, resources, and money? And that's one of the things that I'm pioneering here, is to figure out, can we determine that reliably, consistently, and repeatedly in such a way that it's meaningful? And so far the answer is yes. So that's an interesting conversation that's a lot longer.
Yeah. And did you get your funding? Because I'm noticing a lot of funding is coming out of Europe. They are investing a lot more than the US in infrastructure at the moment. Just another point that might be.
Yeah, so I'm a self-funded entrepreneur for the moment, but I'm in the process now of capital raising. So
Nice. Thanks, Lisa. Lou, you have your hand up?
Yeah, so you mentioned standards, like, this work eventually leading to standards. Have you thought about, what that process entails?
can you say that again? So I missed the first bit.
You talked about standards.
Yes.
Have you thought about, like, how DAIAA would actually create something that would become a standard?
Yeah, I have. And so it's I think a collaboration where we get smart people in the room together and have conversations around what gaps there are presently. And so that's how I ended up on the IETF, in fact, because I discovered some things that I do and that I think about that were not already represented. And I think as DAIAA members, you've already collected the kinds of individuals that would be able to contribute reliably and successfully to that. And so I think it's just setting up an opportunity for us to explore that, and that HOL that Chris mentioned at the beginning, I think is one way forward in regards to that. So I'm open to all of that, and yes to whatever support that DAIAA can provide.
Great. I look forward to following up on that.
Cool.
Nice. Yeah, that's pretty much what we're here for, is to push this forward and see how we can make positive change in the industry. Let me just share this last slide. I think it's probably time to wrap it up, unless anybody has any other questions they wanted to squeeze in before the end. Speak now or forever hold your peace. Bruce.
One quick question. So I appreciate the presentation, but this is about HOL, because I noticed you had some initiatives going. I saw Michael was putting out, and also Nillian, just to let you know, because you said you were a competitor, repivoted their whole business that just launched. So I don't think they're new one. They're in a different lane now currently. Not that competition isn't good, but what's going on with HOL? I've been following and posting and seeing some of your news, and I'm just curious if it ties into today's presentation.
Yeah, so we are, we're in the process of creating the ZKBC, which is zero knowledge boundary compliance, to make sure that people can understand who their agents are, who are interacting, what outputs there are, what accesses they have, the tool calls they're able to use. So those standards processes are taking place every Thursday. And that is that specific cryptographic execution subcommittee. If anybody's interested in joining that, reach out to me on Telegram. It's at NFThinker, or you can just send me an email from this group here and I'll get it. It is closed off now, so it's by invitation only, but I can put in a good word with you to Michael. And I'm sure he's open to more contributions. Other than cryptographic execution, they are working in 3 other verticals. I can't tell you exactly what they are off the top of my head. It'd be nice if one of the HOL guys was here this week to be able to say a little bit more about it. But you can go to, let me just double check here, HOL.org, I believe. Yeah, HOL.org. And you can check out their ecosystem. They have a partnership program, which is HOL.org/partner-program. And you can check out information on the specific subcommittees there.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're definitely open to more contributions from people. If you want to get involved, as I said, message me either in the DAIAA Telegram, which is linked here.
Yeah, we got.
Or you can.
I signed up. I'll send it a request there. Thank you. And then, does it relate at all to, you know, I've been telling a lot of people recently about Keet, KEET.io, which is a peer-to-peer network, which is really first class, backed by Tether, I think, and a company, the parent company, Pears, PEAR, like the fruit, PEARS.com. And then with the new Jack Dorsey Buzz initiative, where I've set up 38 agents from, I have two codexes, and I'm just wondering how that works. As far, does that tie into what you're doing, the management of AI agents? You know, or
yeah, no, I'm not totally sure. I remember you mentioning Keep before. I haven't really looked into them. Buzz is not necessarily what we're working on. I'm actually interested in seeing how we can implement Buzz within our organization, possibly to replace Slack or something like that. And to, I think you can also replace GitHub using Buzz. And it's agentic first. So that's interesting. There's a lot to test out in the agentic community right now.
Crazy is you can have within it, you can have one have Claude Fable, you can have other ones have free models, you can share your CP. It's really amazing how everybody's in one place. I have 2 local Hermes, I have a server with 8 Hermes. It's like, and then I have the actual factory droid, 2 Claudes, 3 codexes, all communicating. It's pretty amazing. Plus, as you said, in the future, perhaps GitHub, and you know, and the messaging and working on projects directly there are pretty. It's you know, I'm still new to it myself, but
yeah, sounds like you definitely know more about it than I do. So,
but I was wondering,
that'd be a good
the addendum to it. If every agent you could you know, have a name and system and track. I thought that was maybe something you could do with HOL. I don't know.
Yeah, potentially. Maybe this is something we can explore next week. So we don't actually have an agenda set for next week. If anybody is open to presenting this similar to the way Joel did this week, I'm totally open to that. Open to everybody here. If not, then we'll just, you know, pick up where we've left off from this week, continue talking about how we can push further into the standards ecosystem. Joel had mentioned, he didn't quite get to it in his presentation, but one of the things that was pending in his presentation was some collaboration on some of his co-authoring some of his proposals. So Joel, I think maybe, you know, I don't know if 2 weeks out is too long, but maybe we could discuss some of that.
Yeah, that's all right, for sure.
Okay, brilliant. So we've gone way over this week. A bunch of people have dropped off. Thanks to everybody who stuck around. I also wanted to shout out Sylvain. Nice to see that you were able to join in lieu of Zoe from Ledgerless. So great to see you here. A lot more to talk about in 2 weeks' time. Our next event is listed here. Here's the Luma link. I've cloned it already. So if you're watching this later on in the YouTube, just type that into your URL. That's where you'll find us next time. Thanks a lot, everyone, for joining, and we'll see you in 2 weeks' time.
Thanks.